Get started. Just hello, everyone. Thank you as ever for being here. My name is Dave Elding. I'm the interim director here at San Francisco Camerawork. And as ever, it's great to see you. It's not the same as being in the gallery, but it's wonderful to see our community come together. The best part of this role really is seeing all of you, meeting the artists and thinkers who share their perspectives with us, and working with all the amazing people here at SF Camerawork that make this possible. And before we get started today, I wanted to introduce one of those amazing people, our board president, Michelle Branch, to help welcome us. Forgive me though, Michelle, she's not in here yet. Well, you know what? I am going to maybe give her an opportunity as we conclude, because I'm sure she will be here soon. And she was excited to meet all of you as well. So we'll just come back to I thought about how to introduce Carlos today. I thought about provocative photography. It's a word that we've used a lot over the years at San Francisco Camerawork. And it made me think about what does it mean to provoke? What does it mean for an image to incite action? And it feels like we need those images. And I thought about this as I considered how to introduce Carlos Avila Gonzalez. Images of turbulent, divisive, unjust and frightening times are what move us to act as a society. We need them. And we see evidence of this every day. It's in the horrific footage of George Floyd's murder and in the inspiring images of peaceful protest. It's in the photos we see of exhausted frontline healthcare workers and in the selfies we use to somehow stay connected when we can't be together. Carlos Avila Gonzalez joined the San Francisco Chronicle in 1997 and has become a leader in the photography department's shift to multimedia reporting. A Bay Area native and graduate of San Francisco State University, Carlos began his career near California's Central Valley at newspapers covering diverse communities. Gonzalez has also traveled to Afghanistan, Cuba, Iraq, Central America, and Mexico for the Chronicle. And he is a volunteer teacher at a national photo camp, National Geographic photo camp for kids. Today, he'll talk about his recent experiences in the field as a photo and multimedia journalist, and will participate in a conversation with us afterwards. If you have a question for Carlos during the presentation, please post them in the Zoom chat. We'll have time for discussion afterwards. And when we get to that, you are very welcome to unmute and participate, but do be aware that we are recording this presentation so we can share it with those who aren't able to tune in live. So feel free to keep your camera off if you prefer as well. So with that, please welcome Carlos Avila Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for being here today. And hopefully, I can live up to that introduction that Dave gave me. I'm really excited to talk to you about what we've been going through for the last few months when it comes to covering both coronavirus, how that's changed our coverage, and also how we've been covering the protests, the George Floyd protests, but also Black Lives Matter in general, and how it's changed from how we've covered them in the past. Because of the pandemic, it's really shifted our ability to cover certain things the way we used to, and so we're really learning how to kind of like adapt in the shadow of the pandemic. So really it's 99% of it is about being careful. It's about being able to protect yourself and the people around you, but specifically also because we don't want to, in some ways, become, a problem for other people that we photograph. Becoming a vector for this, somebody who actually carries the virus, is one of our most important goals to avoid doing, because you just don't want to end up having to be responsible for somebody else's health. We take the risk as photojournalists to be out there every day and to put ourselves at risk a little bit, but we just don't want to impact our communities in a negative way like that, because most of what we do and how we cover our communities is about serving them. And that's always been my philosophy since I was a young photographer, just getting into the business out in Brentwood and these small communities that need our coverage and representation, and that's just something that I've always been very attuned to, is how we serve our community. I've been at the Chronicle for 23 years, started as a 2-year intern back in in 1997, and then finally became a staffer and moved up to the main office in San Francisco in 99, and have been doing a little bit of everything, give and take, international travel, covered war. I've done, you know, a number of, you know, sports assignments. I'm kind of one of the go-to sports guys. And, you know, that's kind of been my routine for the last couple of years. One of the things I want to do is, let me just show you a few of the assignments, you know, to kind of get you, so you understand how far we've come with the, you know, since the pandemic. I mean, typically my days before the pandemic, I'd be covering the Warriors and their championship runs, and just kind of having a, and, you know, their season, and, you know, I covered them every night. And, you know, between that and your basic, you know, sports photography, doing sports features, doing all sorts of different specialized sports photography, like remote cameras and that kind of thing. I tend to be a little bit more on the technical side when it comes to the sports photography. So there's, you know, basically this was one of the last few games that we covered before the pandemic really hit. And other features, community features, you know, things in the Fruitvale district, things that, you know, your basic everyday life kind of stuff. It's always been about kind of like representing these local communities and these local, you know, neighborhoods in interesting and, you know, dramatic ways. I think this was just the last art feature I did in a stage center with Helgi Tomlinson, about to be, you know, putting on the last of his shows, which was inevitably canceled. He specifically, you know, did this one, he directed this one piece for the SF Ballet, and then it was just canceled right off the bat. So, you know, that's basically what I was doing. A lot of like the sports, the, you know, the wine section, the breaking news, whatever you mean, you want to name it. I just, you know, was doing everyday stuff. And then all of a sudden, you know, we went straight from food shots and drink shots to, you know, doctors who are now caring for the elderly, because they're, you know, there's a concentration of, you know, coronavirus cases hitting, you know, the elderly. And so these folks were, you know, basically on the front lines of the coronavirus infection, taking care of people. At that point, it just ended up being a kind of a, I hate to say it, but it was, you know, it was like throwing darts at a board to see what hit, because we didn't really know enough about, you know, who was being infected with the virus, who was being hurt. This young woman had to fly back immediately from Italy because her exchange program shut down. And she was just devastated because she had just left a few weeks before, and, you know, was, you know, forced to come back, and her mother was worried about her. You know, we knew so little about the pandemic at that point that everything was done in an abundance of caution, because you had to be really careful. Nobody knew who was getting sick or how devastating this was going to be at that time. So we're really operating under a very, very broad question mark. And then all of a sudden the food shortages hit. You know, you're looking at people excited about buying toilet paper. And we're literally scrambling to find the news of the day and make images that, that kind of tell that story. This was shot at the Port of Oakland when Governor Newsom was looking at places to dock the Grand Princess, which was the ship that was basically stuck out at sea for a few weeks, because the infections on board were pretty devastating. And so we staked this out, you know, for several days, because we didn't know when it was going to be coming in, and we're looking for angles that really kind of place it in the environment where it's finally going to end up. This was, to me, was one of those pictures that really said, hey, it's coming in, it's here in San Francisco, and we really need to, you know, kind of find a, you know, a way to put it in perspective of the whole city. There were a lot of people really terrified at this point that the ship docking was going to be a danger to the community. And I know a lot of folks in Oakland, friends of mine, were like, well, why is it coming here? Why is it doing that? And, you know, we ended up realizing that a lot of the folks who were on board were quarantined and had to be, you know, medically taken care of. They had, you know, testing sites for those who were showing symptoms and all that. So part of what we needed to do as journalists is to present to the community kind of like a stable perspective on how, you know, these folks who were infected were going to be taken care of properly. And so it was, you know, one of those, our job is to inform and to keep the public, on top of what's going on. And it's really, it's really sad that some of those folks on board, had to be taken out like this, but it's important for us to show this and have the public aware of what's going on. And a lot of the access to that was really restricted. So I don't know if these photos back here are shot with an 800. I'm literally across the channel, completely unable to really see, with the naked eye what I'm photographing. But with that long lens, I'm able to get what I can and give people kind of an idea of what's going on over there. All of these are you can see the people hanging out over the balconies, looking at what's going on, and it really gives you an insight into that anxiety that's going on out there. Is there any questions real quick? Just wanted to make sure I'm looking at, I can't see my chat panel anymore.
We don't have a lot happening in the chat room just yet. Actually, we are, I think if everyone's feeling like I am, we're just rapt at these images and how you capture them.
Okay, well, let me keep going then.
We do have one question in there, just from Sharon. She just put it in, and it's she's asking what the dates are for these photos, if you can know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these photos are probably early March, if I recall. Let me take a look. Give me one sec. It's in here in our. Yeah, so this is the 9th of March. This is when the Grand Princess finally came in. And so, these are all, IPTC tagged with the caption and everything. But, this is all happening within the span of about 3 or 4 days. So going back to, say, even like this young woman coming here from Italy, that was only on the 4th. So we're looking at kind of a progression of some of these photos. This was some of these food shots I took on the, and I hate to, I hate to reference things through food shots, but this is just a week before that. So, we're looking at within a 2-week span of time where everything is just changing, from one day to the next. I mean, these photos of the doctor were taken on the 2nd. And then all of a sudden on the 9th, we have the ship coming in. So we really, had heard like these rumblings from afar about this, this disease that was, basically had only made landfall in Seattle at that point. And we just were kind of like, kind of waiting to see what happened, because there wasn't really enough information all across the board for us to make any plans per se. But I will say that the one thing the Chronicle did that was really good was that we had a disaster plan in place already. And that was important because they knew right away from having talked to the news in Seattle, the Seattle Times, that we had to get out. We had to, work from home, and we did a dry run earlier in the in that early March, where everybody worked from home. And luckily we had that forethought to have these disaster plans in place, but only because we do have so many natural disasters here in California, and the earthquakes and the fires. I mean, we've done a lot of disaster planning. And so everything that I have that I need is in my car. I have a satellite transmitter that if all of the communication goes down, I can transmit from my car if I need to. And it's just, part of the thing about being a journalist in the Bay Area, you have to be able to get your pictures back in. And that's just one of the things that really kept us going through this, because a lot of places didn't really expect to have to shut down. And I think businesses were, okay, how do we, get through all this with Zoom? And, there was an uptick in the learning curve on that. So I think that was something that we already had in place. And then, the last few days after the ship came in was, all of a sudden it's like these games are like the last vestiges of like the season. And, you see how empty this is. And this is just merely 20 minutes before game time. And you don't, people are already getting terrified here in the Bay Area, and they're not coming out to the games. And, my assignment shifted from shooting the action, shooting the game, to shooting the impact that this is going to have. And I was actually scheduled to shoot the game that the Warriors were going to have with the empty arena, which I thought was going to be really incredibly visual to have them play with an empty arena. And then all of a sudden it was canceled like an hour later. So it just cascaded from that point. And so we needed to kind of like adapt change our coverage. And everything from, you know, the early shots of me that I showed you of the food and the wine. I mean, all of a sudden it was like, we're looking at, you know, how people can stay open. Can these businesses survive? How can they keep their customers safe? And so there's, you know, the shift from showing you the nice glass of wine or the nice Negroni or whatever, and or the chocolate mousse or the tiramisu, change to, you know, how do you wipe down these pads, and how do you keep people safe on these cruise ships or get them evacuated properly? You know, it's you know, every, you know, sporting event shut down left and right. The baseball season, which was going to start in a couple of weeks, was shut down. The golf, the U.S. Open here at it's Harding Park, right? Yeah, was shut down. I'm going to make sure I don't misrepresent that. Yeah, Harding Park. Sorry, just wanted to make sure I was telling you all right. So yeah, it's a, you know, all of a sudden a mind shift that, you know, you're now looking at the city completely empty. And so I'm trying to find ways that show that people are staying home and not out and about. And so the last night of the shutdown, which was March 16th, they asked me to photograph the city being empty. And so this was one of the shots that I wanted to see Market Street a little bit more empty than it normally is. And, you know, North Beach, which is kind of one of the mainstays of San Francisco's nightlife, was just barren. And, you know, Vesuvio and City Lights books are, you know, kind of like the epicenter of like San Francisco's cultural history in terms of like literary spaces, and for it to be completely empty was kind of amazing. All of a sudden businesses were shutting down, customers couldn't come in. This was the Saloon, which is I think it's a 140-year-old bar. And these folks were saying goodbye because you just never knew what was going to happen. It was, you know, kind of a sad moment for some of these places, because you never know when some folks were they might have gotten sick. And that's what I was thinking was, you know, this might be the last time that this bar is ever open. So I'm trying to make images that anchor kind of like our understanding of what this time is at this point with the pandemic. And, you know, it's been 4 months now, about 4 months that we've been shut down. And, you know, some of these places might never come back. So it's really sad. And, you know, looking at, I was trying to show the emptiness, and, you know, this is one of the last pictures I took that night of the Bay Bridge that was completely empty except for a few cars going across. And typically at that time of night, you're looking at a Bay Bridge that's, you know, still, it's still populated with some cars, you know, and I at night generally, so I'm always kind of like checking out interesting night shots. So that's something that I've always been very interested in, is kind of how night looks at San Francisco. And to see it this empty was just shocking to me, you know, and I think a lot of folks were equally as moved by the emptiness of this photo. And then just how people were getting about, you know, all of a sudden we had to learn social distancing, and how do people get out and kind of enjoy or still be sane when it comes to like not being cooped up all day. You know, everything was, you know, even like the fun places at Tilden Park, the carousel was shutting down. And now our shooting style is shifted too, because now we have to maintain a distance. We can't be as close to people as we normally are, or we like to get. And I'm very much a photographer who likes to get close to people. And I use my, my kind of like my, what's it called? I hate to use the word charm, but I kind of like work with people really well in terms of like, you know, getting them to trust me and let me in a little bit more. And so there's just a barrier that usually happens when you're photographing people in the public. You have to kind of build up a good rapport with them. And I've kind of worked at that for a long time. But now we couldn't even use that. So everything was being shot from about the same distance, and we're changing the way things look because of, you know, safety concerns for them and for ourselves. And that was just, you know, something that we had to keep in mind. And, you know, for families, especially when everything shuts down, you're looking at these playgrounds in densely populated areas like the Tenderloin that are all of a sudden off limits to families. And how are these kids who need to get out, need to, you know, kind of play, how are they going to, you know, be taken care of, you know, for their mental health, for their physical health and everything? They, you know, when you have kids, you want to be able to give them some time outside. And so everybody was like trying to grow into this new role of being stuck inside. and also seeing how nurses and healthcare professionals were being impacted by this, and how there was not enough PPE for nurses. This is shot at Kaiser. It was a protest by Kaiser nurses, trying to bring some visibility to the fact that they were being asked to wear PPE for longer periods than was safe. You're looking at, you know, a lot of folks who are unable to even like get into safe places, like the homeless, and how do they, you know, get the kinds of things that they need in order to keep themselves from getting infected. And, you know, when folks live in places that are typically not as clean as your home or my home, it's harder for them to have a place to even wash their hands correctly, or even to, you know, if they have an infection, to keep it from getting worse. Or, and then what happens if they do get sick? You know, there's no heating, there's no plumbing, there's, you know, sanitation's really a difficult situation. So going into the homeless camps was really important for me to kind of like help to carry that story a little bit forward, because we can't leave folks like this outside of our scope of healthcare, because they're already forgotten, and we need to kind of give them a little bit more visibility. And, you know, I know it's hard as a photographer to not, you know, want to get in and get close to these folks. And you know, I have to say that I broke my own rules sometimes, because I'd go in there with full N95 mask with gloves on, and I'm just like, I just need to get a little bit closer, need to get a little bit closer. And also that like I was saying, that building a rapport with somebody is like, we're limited in how much time we can spend with people, to about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And, you know, how do you build a relationship and even get people to trust you in that little amount of time? And I think that, you know, it's imperative for us to do that with the homeless, because we can't just treat them like objects that were, you know, that are just arranged for our photography. To give them dignity, to give them, you know, real coverage. And I think that, you know, having worked with the homeless before and been at these camps, you know, quite often, it's really important to kind of maintain that same kind of like respect, and not treat them like they're infected. And that's one thing that I really worried about would come across in pictures, was that I was treating them like with a standoffish lens, if that makes any sense. Like I was like distancing myself intentionally. But this is, I mean, this is really what they're faced with. These are the places that they're given, or were given at that time, to get themselves clean, to have, you know, hand sanitizer. And it's just not being taken care of, or wasn't at the time, by the city. Now things have gotten better, and a lot of the folks, because of these, you know, these photos and these stories that we did, are now in kind of like temporary housing through hotels, because we're shining a light on how bad these circumstances are. Then eventually, you know, the story started, you know, unfolding about how are people staying sane in their homes. You know, how are they doing their exercises? How are they keeping their outlook positive? You know, when they're stuck at home all the time. And then all of a sudden, you're looking at the Zoom yoga sessions, or the you know, physical fitness sessions, and people are all getting together and doing their workouts online. And I thought it was a really interesting photo to see, you know, the spread of people behind him, this, like, you know, this tiled, you know, screen of all these people who are getting together virtually to do something physical. And so I thought it was an interesting look from behind him. We did stories on how the media, like us, you know, we're now working from home specifically. So we got to go into Greg Papa's house, and he's a, you know, longtime radio announcer here in the Bay Area. And how are they, you know, able to put together their reports and their stories from home. And it was just one of those, you know, literally 15 minutes, 10 minutes in his home, and then we had to get out, because it's not, and that's not something that he asked us to do. We just needed to keep our time in somebody else's space to a minimum, because, you know, at that point we didn't know enough about the virus to know that we could stay somewhere for a good amount of time. And it's just safer for everybody's health, for us to be kind of limiting our time. So we're doing what we can in a very short amount of time. And I kind of feel like, you know, we do what we can at this time. And you know, where are the answers going to come from? Certain photos are just, you know, informational. We're looking at how do we present an interesting photo of the hospitals where this is all going to happen. You know, there's you could, I hate to say it, but the building mugshot is one of my all-time least favorite kind of photos to take, and we do it so much in the journalism world because we have to show where something is happening. It's the evidence photo of my world, and I really hate that that kind of an approach. So I always try to look for something a little bit different with better light and better, you know, just something to give it a little bit more long exposures, that kind of thing. And it's just something that that I try to implement instead of just running up, taking a picture and leaving, because I think that's kind of lazy. And you know, UCSF and both of these campuses were going to be heavily involved in the both you know, virus research as well as vaccine research and any kind of treatment. So they needed the photos for further stories down the line. Do you want to? Are there any questions that I've gone through quite a bit there? Is anybody?
Yeah, you've been expansive. There's some really wonderful questions. I think we can come back individually. I was just thinking about a way of maybe pulling these together. You're getting a lot of questions, and thank you all for participating, that I think can be summed up in a conversation about process. So you're getting some technical questions about beautiful images, but also, you know, photography is all about process. And as you approach your work, you're now having to think about a lot of dimensions, not just the composition of a shot, but how do you protect yourself? How do you protect other people? How do you manage consent in new times? So I would love to come back to some of these questions individually, but I think they all ladder up to this new kind of navigation that you're having to bring to your work. And I wonder if you could speak to that a bit.
Sure. That's you know, it's a great place to answer that because, you know, now everything was being done at a distance, and so our lenses changed, our you know, our approach changed. Even, you know, even our pre-shoot approach changed. At about this point, we're actually doing a pre-assignment, what's it called, sort of a triage kind of a deal, where our picture editors are now asking people that we're photographing if we're going into their homes or in close proximity. They have to ask, and the photographers actually were you know, kind of instrumental in bringing this together. The questions are, you know, are you feeling ill? Is anybody in your household experiencing any symptoms? We're basically getting a kind of a safety net for the photographers, because that proximity is not just dangerous for us and for our families, but also because we don't want to be carrying this to somebody else's home. We also started to, just out of safety's sake, building time in between assignments, so that if there was a time when we were in somebody's personal space where we weren't 100% sure that it was, you know, completely, not, I hate to use the word clean, but not dangerous per se, that we could go home and change. And, you know, basically at that time, late March, early April, we still didn't know enough. So when we would go into people's homes, sometimes we would, like or even like the homeless encampment, I told my editor, okay, I need an hour and a half between that assignment and my next assignment, and I'm going to go home and take everything that I wiped down my cameras with alcohol wipes so that I wouldn't be carrying anything on the cameras to the next assignment. And that happened every single time. Every single time I would leave an assignment where there was a critical safety issue involved, wipe down the cameras before they even got back into the car. Because at that point, we didn't even know if surface contact was a means of transmitting the virus. So the cameras are kind of like, not, you know, they're sanitized. And then anything on me, like any lenses that I might have taken out, also same thing. My belt, my think tank utility belt thing with all the pouches, that got a quick wipe down as well. And then if I was in a place where I might have touched anything or rubbed up against anything, I would go home and you know, take off my shoes outside, like you've heard most nurses do now, and then drop, basically change my clothes. I would drop everything that I was wearing right there in the entry, sanitize that later, and go change. And if I was in a place, and if it was this bad or so bad that I felt I even needed to take a shower, I would build in the time to take a shower, because we just didn't know at that time. It was really a kind of a wild card. You know, safety was not guaranteed, and we didn't know enough at that time to really feel like we could avoid those steps. And so I hope that answers that a little bit, Dave.
That was great. There was another question that Lisa Tron had that I think is interesting, where she just asked, you know, do you have consent to take these photographs? And I find this interesting. I love doing street photography.
Mm-hmm.
Photography consent, it's an interesting space. And I thought it was an interesting question. Have you thought about your answer to that question in a different way, given the circumstances, both of the pandemic and also of the protest?
Sure. Yeah. Anytime we go into somebody's home, always consent. Always. That has to be our, you know, they have to know we're coming in there. Otherwise, you know, you might have the police called on you. Out in public, it's a little bit of a different nature. That question really, you know, the laws basically say that out in public, when you're visible to the public, there's no expectation of privacy. And so we work in ways with, say, like the homeless and marginalized communities, people who don't have a safe place to go to. You know, we work with them on a much more awareness-based approach, where they know what we're doing. We explain to them exactly what's going on, the stories we're working on, and we try to do that as well in protest coverage. And you know, basically, the word consent to me is, and I did another panel last week or the week before on consent, and I think it's misused here because I think it promotes this vision of permission, and I don't think that that's something that that is, you know, something that should be overlaid on journalism as a whole. I like to look at it more as, what's the word I'm looking for? Transparency, like being able to tell people exactly what's going on and who you are and what you're working for. And again, that comes down to being a good journalist and letting them know what you're doing. There are situations where you can't do that because the time or the moment or the place, and I'll show you some photos soon. It just doesn't allow that to happen. But there are ways to, even through reading somebody's body language, you can tell if there's something, if they're uncomfortable, and you know, such. And then there are situations where, you know, there just is no time, and the news is so important that that, you know, you have to get the picture. There's just, bottom line, that's ultimately the telling the story is incumbent on that photo at that time. Whether there's that ability to discuss with somebody, tell them what you're doing and who you are, it can't happen. And I've had that happen with arrests at protests. When there's people running from tear gas being deployed, you can't stop in the middle of that and say, by the way, my name is so, and people are just screaming and running, and that's, you know, there's just no place to do. There's no, you know, place to block out a little bit of time to do that. So we do it when we can, and a lot of it is really comes down to having kind of a good approach with people and understanding their body language, and understanding when something, you know, if they shy away when you're about to take a picture of them, that to me says body language, I don't feel comfortable with you doing this. So you move on. And then, but then there's places where somebody might be breaking into a building or whatever, and during a protest, you know, and I didn't cover a lot of the looting this time around, where you just can't say, by the way, I'm with the Chronicle, I'd like to take your picture robbing this place, because that would probably get your, you know, you in the hospital. So it's really one of those situations where you have to play it by ear. Ultimately, that's the bottom line. I hope I answered that question a little bit. I'm about to get to the protest stuff, so I think what I'll do is I'm going to skip by these, because these photos were just me talking about how the communities were now starting to act, you know, become active again. You know, going through farmers markets, people were figuring out ways to, you know, how to perform, how to do therapy sessions. This woman was a therapist. But, you know, we're now doing portraits at a distance, and, you know, just trying to use outdoor lighting and that kind of thing. And it's really how people are kind of like creating this new I hate to use the word, this phrase, new normal, because there's nothing normal about it. I mean, you know, this is also showing how empty the streets are. You know, I'm a licensed drone pilot, and so we try to, you know, use aerials whenever we can to kind of help to tell the story a little bit. But also we're trying to help, you know, people like this gentleman who was a worker at one of the hospitals. He was on the janitorial crew, and you know, they're not getting the kind of PPE that they need. So we're looking at not just healthcare workers who need it, but also the folks who are ultimately keeping the hospitals clean and sanitized, you know, being able to stay healthy. And this is a great example of what I was saying about our safety. So this nurse, he was living in a hotel when because he didn't want to go home to his husband, who was immune compromised. And so I had to go into this gentleman's hotel room, and you know, he works in a COVID unit. So like I was saying earlier about, you know, not touching anything, I didn't even like set my cameras down. And usually I'm, you know, when I take a knee, you know, set the camera down on the floor, wouldn't even do that at that point. And ultimately ended up going straight home and you know, kind of like taking care, you know, taking my you know, sanitizing everything, changing clothes and everything. And this was just me in there for 15 minutes. And again, we didn't know at that time how much the virus was transmissible through contact or anything. But again, if you're in an enclosed space, you know, now you're learning that you know, being in an enclosed space for an amount of time is how it's transmitted. And here he is, he's just talking to his husband. He can't go home, and the hospital or the insurance or the medical center isn't paying for the hotel. So this is all coming out of his pocket because he wants to keep his husband safe. So again, it's one of those things where 15 minutes in somebody's hotel room like that, and you know, you kind of like have to draw the line at that point. I wish I could have spent more time with him, because, you know, those kinds of stories are more compelling, but we're limited with that time frame because of the concern about it in possible infection. So you just pull every trick you can out of your bag, and, you know, different portraits, different widths. You know, you're looking at something that kind of like gives you the sense of the overall space he's in. Hopefully you convey some of the emotion, because that's the hard part. In 15 minutes, you don't get somebody to really kind of like open up to you, and that's really the tricky part at this point, is connecting with people. And then, you know, different assignments, you know, you just end up like looking at you know, how the city is engaging with this. And here Salesforce was projecting hands clapping when people were starting to go out onto their porches and clap for medical workers. So they were projecting hands clapping at a particular hour, prayer flags and that kind of thing. And to look at the whole city kind of like coming together, different parts of it, you know, how different buildings did it as well. You're looking at, you know, an overall, trying to create this larger view of how the entire city is coming together for it. Even, you know, something as simple as, you know, how do people prepare Seder dinner when Passover was coming? You know, we did stories on that for the food department. So every section of the paper has its needs to be filled, and everything shifted to the pandemic, to COVID-19. And so, you know, the food section needed to be filled in. The you know, this is for one of the city, what's the word, the city reporters. I think it was for Heather Knight, but I can't remember exactly. But this gentleman had just started as heading up the planning commission. So all these things are still going on. We just have to find ways to, you know, show them. And again, being in somebody's house for 15 minutes, you're rifling through your bag of tricks to get interesting light, interesting lens, you know, look, that kind of thing, to be able to tell the story. You know, and then there's folks who ordinarily go out and perform. They're in clubs, and how are they keeping their fans, you know, entertained? And so these folks are doing it through home sessions. And again, I'm so happy they had that light in there, because it really made for an interesting look. And, you know, just kind of different angles, detail shots. Detail shots have become kind of like a go-to right now, because they really help to expand the coverage a little bit. And different angles. I mean, this is a Hail Mary. I'm literally holding this up, you know, up over my head, almost touching the ceiling, because I wanted to get the Christmas lights in there just to give it a different look. And then the scary part too is, you know, how La Casa de las Madres, which is in San Francisco, was dealing with a lot of the domestic violence. And so that's also one of the critical things on how people being sheltered in place are, what kinds of resources they have. And so all these stories are kind of like eking out of our daily coverage, and we're finding ways to tell these stories, what services they provide, how they feed people who are in hotels and in their shelters. And a quick portrait of the director there, just, nice light from a window, that kind of thing. You just have to, literally, you have to make it work with what you've got right there, because bringing in lights and setting them down and setting everything up and taking the time to light everything was just not available at that time because of the fear that might, kind of like transmit the virus. And I've got to tell you, one of the best things about, just shooting breaking news is it kind of took you out of that whole like mindset of, okay, wipe the cameras down, change clothes. So when I saw smoke coming over the bridge on my way home, and it was over on Alameda, and I just raced because I just needed a break, a mental break from everything related to coronavirus and infection. And, I hate to say it, but it just freed your mind a little bit. It helps to get you back in your normal routine, your normal, frame of mind visually. So this was just something that I stopped and got some photos of. And it ended up being a bigger story later, because one of the families who was living there was unfortunately had just moved in like the month before from being homeless. So we were able to use this rather than just a quick breaking news story. We ended up following up on that, and it became a little more detailed later. So these kinds of things, it might not seem important at the time, but we have to go out there and cover them, because they inevitably do lead to a more context later. And one of the things I have to say about our COVID coverage is that it became so much about portraits and about the portraits from beyond, like I said, 6 feet away. And so, how do we make these things work, and how do we make them interesting? And again, this guy had some health issues. And so just being around him, we put him at risk. So, again, you have to kind of, find what you can and get what you can in those moments. Let me see. And speaking of, so here's my thing. Anytime I can get out of town during this time to free my mind, and it's kind of a mental cleanse, between the breaking news and just a story where I can be outside, it's amazing. And I spent the whole day up at Point Reyes photographing the Tule elk, and it was just a blessing, because you can really kind of like breathe a little more deeply. You don't have to be around people, and it's kind of like, it's just animals and rolling hills, and it's a wonderful thing. And so you end up just appreciating kind of being able to go out and shoot, wild animals for a few hours. The mental break is great. And, I guess as a photographer, we don't get to do that as much right now, but I've jumped at every opportunity that I can to do it, because it just helps to cleanse your mind a little bit. Let me jump ahead to the protest. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about daily life in here that I think is great. Families that kind of like, how are they doing their, with their kids at home? How are they, cooped up? Really sweet families who gave us time in their homes. And again, 15, 20 minutes at most. And I was lucky that these kids were wonderful and let me, basically gave me everything I needed in 15 or 20 minutes. These are, artists who are like figuring out ways to, perform and to share that with other people. And it's just like how they're keeping from going crazy themselves too. More breaking news, just how do you, again, like I said, the drone is a wonderful thing, because you don't have to get close. You can make interesting images and stay away from folks, and long lenses really help as well. I'm going to keep going here. But again, a lot of portraits. This is, let me see, the Office of Emergency Services at Moscone Center. And I'm looking for moments that kind of help to tell the story a little bit, how distanced they are. This is the director there, who was just kind of spending some time with a therapy dog for a while. And a lot of these are just showing how people are, kind of keeping their distance. This was an interesting story, because it had never occurred to me. People were, complaining at the very beginning, oh my God, my hair, right? And so this woman figured out that she could really capitalize on that by making wigs out of, human hair. And it was a great story because, a lot of these folks were like, she found the opportunity and jumped on it. And so she's making these great wigs in her home. And so she's, they're human hair, and it's really, to me, I'd never seen it done before. So I learned a lot from that experience too. And I'm just gonna keep going quickly. There's still news every day, so sometimes we have to go out there and like just cover your basic metro assignment, which is, this on this one they found that the redwoods capture more carbon dioxide, like 6 times more than they initially had thought about. So you have to go out there and meet these folks and still tell the daily stories that have nothing to do with the virus, and it's wonderful. And again, I got to be outside, which was great. Let's see, a lot of science stuff. If I close this, will I lose the screen share? Maybe it's time. If you have a question, I can kind of.
We were just you're getting some thank for sharing everything. I think we're kind of wrapped in the story and seeing the images. I think
sure.
You could look at these for a while. If you want to close this and jump to protest. I think it should be fine. If we jump out of screen sharing for a moment, that's okay too. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, some of the things we did was we ended up having to do portraits of some of the medical care workers. And this was something that ended up being kind of like a look at them and how they're doing throughout this. And this is later in the session. I'll just go through these quickly. And these folks are wonderful. They came into the studio, and again, it's like very limited time. But to give them some props for everything that they were doing. The lighting, I wish I could have done more with modifiers and such, but we were also doing video at the time. And so I had to do it in a way that I could keep the constant light and do video at the same time. There was a video portrait. But little details, things that they, go through every day. And we wanted to, give them a space to offer their stories. And so we compiled that with video that they shot on their phones and such. And it was a kind of a meaningful story at that time, because so many of them had been working in COVID units or in local communities that they had, been at for years. And so it was great to give them some appreciation for what they did. And they were wonderful people to work with too. And, I just wish I could have hugged them at the end of the day, because you just want to give them some love for everything that they're going through. But I'm gonna head to the protest real quick. Because there's so many different stories and so many different, ways to kind of go through this disease. But so we get to the point where, all of a sudden it's like, George Floyd was killed in early or late May. And then, all of a sudden everything erupted, and I wasn't on for the first couple of nights when things got a little bit dicey, where everything was being trashed and burned down. So, that was, something I've covered in the past, and I've seen it happen in the past. And so it was, by the time I got back around to being on coverage, it was more of, just much more peaceful protests. And actually the looting and the smashing and grabbing had moved on to other parts of the Bay Area. And am I screen sharing this okay? Can you guys see it? Okay. Hello?
Yeah, it's great, Carlos.
What's that?
It looks good.
Good. So these are, this is probably in the week after the major protest started. I think there was a Friday and a Saturday. They got really, really violent, and there was a lot of looting. And like I said, one of the things that we found with protests, because I've covered so many of them, is that there's kind of this ring of almost like a different layers of the protest. And typically the center of the protest is always this core of folks who are really there for the cause, who are peaceful, who want to, get this message out, and they're there for that. And then there's groups that kind of circulate around that to take advantage. So there's the guys who like to smash stuff and just break stuff, and then there's the guys who are there to loot. And thank God we've seen the looters move on to different areas, because they're now seeing that the police are so occupied, like let's say in downtown San Francisco or in Oakland, that they're now going out and doing this crazy stuff like ripping off, what's it called, dealerships in San Leandro. They drive up with tow trucks even, and I guess out there they stole like 75 cars, which is not a random thing, I would imagine. So, you know, now all of a sudden it's a much more peaceful environment, and, you know, the message is coming out and people are really, you know, really dedicated to the message. So at that point, it was like a much more calm environment for everybody. Still passionate. I mean, and that's one of the things that I really wanted to you know, point out is like all these folks out there just, you know, to a T wanted to get this message out. And I've never seen anything like it in the 2 decades that I've been covering protests since Rodney King. You know, I've never felt the change that has come out of it. And it's amazing to me, the dedication. And I mean, these folks are out there in the middle of a pandemic and they're just, you know, putting it all there. Health be damned, they're out there to get the message out, and I love them for it. And so if they're out there, I'm out there. I'm wearing a mask, but I'm in the middle of this thing, because you can't shoot these photos from a distance. You can't, like, you know, it just feels wrong. You have to be in there. You have to see faces. You have to see their emotion and their dedication. And I think, to me, it's important to be in the middle of that. Is it dangerous? Sure, and at that point we didn't know that most of these protests would not lead to a higher transmission rate. But you know, somebody was just killed in a really horrific way, and you have to honor what they're doing out there. And that's something that I felt was critical, to be in there and see people's faces and let them know that their efforts weren't going to be ignored. You know, and some pictures are quieter than others. You know, there's different types of photos that you can do, and, you know, a lot of folks, you know, some of them don't want to be photographed, and I respect that. I work around them, especially if they're just kind of like, you know, they're, you know, doing their thing. And again, it's like it depends on the photograph, because sometimes you have to take a picture whether it's comfortable for anybody, and it's not comfortable for me to have to, you know, do that in a way that you know, makes somebody uncomfortable, because it's not how I was kind of, I guess, raised in the industry. I worked in small towns to begin with, in small communities, and so every time you took a picture, you would hear about it. And so this connection to the community is super important to me. But also, to kind of like tell the story correctly, you have to sometimes take pictures that are uncomfortable, or show, you know, things that aren't always pleasing per se. And that's just the nature of what we do. It's not to, you know, to expose somebody incorrectly. It's about being transparent, being accurate, and being fair in terms of your coverage. And I think that's the greater nugget you should take away from what we're doing out there. We want people's stories to come out, because, you know, if they go out there and do all this and everybody ignores it, then it's a waste of their energy. You know, and I employ everything I can to tell these stories, including, like, I keep a drone on me to show the empty streets after the curfew. This is one photo that shows that. I actually wish that this guy on the bicycle was going down the middle of the street. It would have been kind of an interesting, you know, little detail. But you take what you can before the sun goes down, that kind of thing. But again, you just show what you can when it happens. Sometimes you're photographing out of the window of your car because you can't get out. There's a blockage in traffic, or the protesters take a left turn instead of a right turn, and then you're kind of stuck. And I'll be honest, there were some times where in places like downtown San Francisco, it was a little bit unnerving to get out of your car as a photographer, because 3 of my friends were robbed, 2 at gunpoint. 2 at gunpoint, and 1 had his stuff stolen. Another guy had his entire car stolen and his gear, and he had his house keys stolen as well. So you're really kind of like walking around in the middle of this with your head on a swivel, because you just don't know when you're you know, if you don't pay attention, you could be hurt. So this was a little bit different in some regards than most other protests that I've seen. At this point, this was a very peaceful protest in downtown Oakland. And, you know, there's moments like this, which, you know, it's like sometimes we can't just, you know, there's some folks who, you know, kind of say, why are you hugging the police and why are you showing that? I'm like, because it happened. I'm not laying judgment either way. I'm not trying to make a statement either way. So it's like, this is something that just happened and had to be shown. And then I get back around to Broadway, and all of a sudden the tear gas comes out and the flashbang grenades. And at this point, I'm actually, I was actually shooting blind because I got hit by the tear gas at that point as well. So I ran toward the gas. I had goggles on that weren't fully sealed, and my eyes shut down. And so I told my reporter, I just kind of grabbed her shoulder and said, I can't see, just keep an eye on me. And I walked up to, I could see vaguely what these guys were doing, but I'm like shooting this through tears and trying to get what's going on there. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to do what you can with what you've got. Finally cleared my eyes out and went back to photographing what was left of the people at that intersection. And at that point, it was a little bit tricky because I had my press credentials out, but Katie Nielsen from KPIX was arrested briefly. They weren't paying attention to some of the press out there. They were, you know, taking them in if they didn't look right or something. I don't know exactly what their reasoning was, but she was released ultimately a few minutes later. And this is one of those situations where I was mentioning that you can't stop and get somebody's name sometimes. You can't, you know, think about this as consent, because, you know, all of a sudden it's like from that initial tear gas situation a few blocks down, all of a sudden the police came in, and you can see some of them chasing, you know, toward the back end of that frame. You see there was like people yelled, and all of a sudden you heard people running. And so this woman literally just ran by me and then kept going. And then so I'm looking at the cluster of police coming in, and then they took this guy down. And my job in that moment is to document what's going on. So I'm actually walking toward the police at this time as he's being arrested, and trying to make sure that they understand that I'm a member of the press, and I have my credential kind of like right under my chin here. It's actually, you know, pretty highly visible right there. But I also have a camera out, and, you know, I'm not dressed like, you know, I don't have press written on anything that I wear, because I think that's also kind of a safety issue for us. So I'm getting as close as I can without feeling like I'm going to get arrested. And this guy on the left here ran up as the guy's being, you know, taken down on the street, the previous frame. And I guess they didn't like how quickly he was approaching, and all of a sudden he was next. And so, you know, I was trying to get in as close as I can, but, you know, the police don't like us being that close, because, you know, the photos sometimes, you know, don't really flatter some of the holes they have. So this photo has, like, you know, his shoes have been somehow lost. This guy in the car behind is watching the whole thing, and you see the original guy being picked up off the ground in the back. And then, you know, I'm literally trying to get in, probably about maybe 6 feet away, and you can see that the one officer stepped in front of me. You can see his shoe on the lower right. And I just want to see that this guy is not, you know, not being in a chokehold, or, you know, or what's going on as they're, you know, putting him in custody. At that point, I'm, you know, trying to, like, not get myself arrested or get, you know, knocked over or whatever, because there's a lot of police still running around. And this guy was actually trying to throw a spike strip at a vehicle that had gone around the arrests. You can see the spike strip in his left hand, and then he's got a kind of a launcher that he used to mark the vehicle. He actually fired that at the car. I didn't get a good shot of it, but I mean, these photos are like all happening in a span of 25, 30 seconds. So I'm trying to keep track of where I am in relation to the police, to the arrests. So I'm not, like, in front, you know, getting into a space where it can be a little bit more dangerous. And then, you know, later that night, you know, things still kept going with the arrests, and, you know, they kettled a couple of hundred people at that point, I think. So yeah, so it's just about keeping safe and keeping a distance, but trying to tell the story. That's the important part. You know, over several nights, we just kind of kept going back and, you know, doing photos of, you know, what was going on as curfews were initiated, kind of thing. They just wanted us to be out there to make sure that, you know, the paper wanted us to be out there to kind of keep the coverage going. And so you're looking for different ways to tell these stories, like every different night, how the protests change from one day to the next, if they're escalating or, you know, calming down or whatever. It's just one of those things you have to kind of like continue the story, kind of keep it going forward. And sometimes it's just the face that says so much, you know, the anguish and the pain of somebody who's like, you know, just, you know, they say, I'm done with this shit. You know, I'm just, that face tells me that there's, you know, just stop, you know. And, you know, eventually this is the night that they had the curfew going, and a lot of folks just kind of stayed out and past curfew, and they had a dance party afterward. I didn't, you know, by the time I left, the dance party hadn't started yet. So I wish I had been out there for that, because it's really kind of a great way for the protesters to say, no, we're not gonna, you know, we're not going home and you can't make us. It was just this really good feeling. So I saw it later that evening. But there's just something about, you know, the people out there who are staying out there to make sure that they're heard, that the voices of the people who have been injured or killed aren't forgotten. And then the next day, I think this was just a day after DC did their Black Lives Matter mural on the street in front of the White House, I believe, or Lafayette Park. They did one on the streets in Oakland, and I think this is 15th Street, if I'm not mistaken. And I was off that day, but I ran out there because I thought it'd make an interesting perspective from the air. And then strung these three pictures together for the full Black Lives Matter. This is a composite, you know, I'll be very open about that. I put that in the caption as well. And just wanted to make sure that people didn't forget that this was out there. Sorry, another breaking news thing. I'll just go past that one real quick. And then in the middle of this, we're still doing stories about the pandemic. So, you know, all of a sudden, just after these, you know, protests and the craziness of that, they assigned me to do stories about survivors of COVID-19. And so all of a sudden, I'm like taking a week to just try and catch up with these folks after some of them almost died. You know, they're just kind of coming out of the, had just been out of the hospital for a couple of weeks, and they were gracious enough to give us the opportunity to spend some time with them and to tell their stories, because some of them were you know, pretty critical, and, you know, some of them are still suffering. I just spoke to one of them the other day, and she said that they had been experiencing symptoms for 100 days, and they still weren't sure if it was, how quickly it was going to you know, dissipate. This gentleman actually got it in Louisiana and New Orleans, and that was one of the stories we did about the Bayview. He was actually from Oakland, but his mom was having a birthday that was mentioned in the Bayview story. And a lot of folks from the Bay Area went back to New Orleans for this birthday and got sick. And so a lot of people that he knew, that the elders in the Bayview Hunters Point district, died because of this contamination. He was lucky. He actually was able to, you know, he'd been on a ventilator, I think, for about 30 days or something like that. And so he was still kind of wobbly and still kind of like getting around kind of like very carefully. But again, he gracious enough to give me the time, and I worked around his schedule to give them, you know, give them the respect that they deserve for surviving. It's just such an amazing story that these folks went through. You know, another survivor. This is a series of portraits. This is a triathlete. So for everybody who tells you that, you know, you have to be like 50 plus and in bad health to get COVID-19, she's 29 years old and had COVID-19 and then suffered a stroke while she was actually trying to ride her bike to feel better. She suffered a stroke and could not count, could not recite the alphabet. You know, for about a week and a half, she was having trouble remembering a lot of things. Still recovering from that, and 29 years old. So anybody who tells you that it's an old people's disease, it's not, you know. And at this point, I felt comfortable enough because we knew more about the disease that I could bring light and spend a little bit more time. So, you know, I did what I could with some of these folks, maintained a distance from them, even at their homes or in their general, you know, presence. But I felt that we were, you know, we had learned enough about the disease where I was comfortable enough bringing lights. And this was something that I wanted to kind of do a little bit more of a more elaborate look. And you know, for some of them, this mother and daughter both you know, about 100 days of symptoms. Mom followed daughter by about 3 days, almost identical symptom pattern. And the daughter, she had actually gotten SARS back in 2009, so she was already having some health issues to begin with because of that. And she believes that that's kind of a component of why she's having such a hard time. But I just wanted to, you know, kind of give them some, you know, some nicer lit portraits, that kind of thing. This woman lost her father, not from COVID-19, but because the hospital were so overwhelmed with patients, they weren't taking care of him for another medical issue that he was having. He died in the hospital. He choked on something, and it was a tragic loss for her. To be in the hospital herself and find out that her father died while she was there was heartbreaking for her. And I tried to find places that were meaningful to them. So this is this woman, for exercise, she would go to the steps, and you know, on this beautiful view of San Francisco, it was kind of her place to go and like clear her head. And you know, this is before the sickness. She was you know, very active and would climb these steps all the time. So I wanted to find places that were meaningful to them. And this gentleman here, he shared this note with me that was you know, if you read through it, he was more concerned about people thinking he was messy, he had a messy home, if he got taken to the hospital, because he was literally debating on whether to go to the emergency room or not. But he was worried that people would think his spring cleaning was his biggest, you know, how he normally had his home. But you know, we laughed about it a little bit. He was really a great guy to talk to. He actually made this this poker out of a garden, kind of a garden spike, and it's about 6 feet long. So he would use it to keep people away from it. It was really kind of funny. He wanted a photo with that as well. And I let people kind of like, you know, dictate, you know, or kind of like not dictate, but contribute, you know, ideas to the photo shoot. I think this ran on the front page of our paper. Just a quiet moment, you know, beautiful light, no light here. This is all natural light, and it just kind of felt right to photograph him. He had a really great story and interesting character. So you know, it's just a nice portrait. Oops, she came back. And you know, some folks just wanted to be in their neighborhood because this guy said his neighbors really helped him get through it. He was a nursing supervisor down in Fremont, I believe, or somewhere down in, you know, down south end of Alameda County. And, but he said his neighbors helped him get through it. So he wanted to be in his neighborhood, which was really sweet. And, you know, besides the protests, we're still doing like our basic everyday coverage. And this is one of the stories that we've done projects on the homeless for years. You know, last year we did 24 hours in homelessness, and this year it was a different approach. This year we're doing stories on how the homeless are coping with COVID-19. And this gentleman was 77 years old. I was assigned to do a story on a senior citizen living on the streets with COVID-19. And Juventino Barojas he's just a sweet little gentleman who, you know, sleeps in a bus shelter. And he's sleeping in this bus shelter across from where he used to work at the Marriott on Mission Street. And it just struck me as like such a sad commentary on how we're treating our seniors. And, you know, he's literally, you know, running away when people come and bother him or sometimes if somebody's in the bus shelter, he can't even stay there. Finding him certain nights was really tricky because he just, you know, couldn't stick around if somebody was bothering him or threatening to steal his stuff. And, you know, but a couple nights I went out there a couple nights to look for him. You know, it's hard to locate him. But again, the few times that I did, he was really wonderful to work with. And he's actually doing better now because he got into the city's COVID-19 housing program. I guess they had some hotels set aside for the homeless, senior citizens who were homeless. And he was able to get into that a few weeks ago. But just this, you know, he came over from Mexico. He worked in hospitality. He's just a very genteel kind of little gentleman. He's really sweet. But again, the city's empty. So, you know, there's this really weird feeling about seeing folks walk around, getting in food lines at Glide Memorial Church. And this is, you know, this is just how, you know, this is daily life for the homeless. How are they dealing with all this? How are they getting through this pandemic that, you know, they're more exposed. They don't have a place to go clean up again, like I mentioned earlier. So there's so many different factors involved when you're homeless and living through a pandemic. And he's actually got a good routine though. He actually gets his food in the morning, goes back out, sits in you know, in these little parks and just, you know, has his breakfast. And then if he gets a chance to jump on a bus and go out to the SFO, and that's where he sits and has his lunch. And then he goes and charges his cell phone and his little computer. And so he's able to kind of keep a modicum of some normalcy. And I'm really happy that he was able to find a place to stay, because he was already saying that the living on the street was tough on him, because he was literally sleeping sitting down, and it was having some adverse effects on his body. And so I'm happy that he's in a place where he can stretch out and recuperate a little bit. And this is one of the stories we were doing on this Class of 2020 project that we followed seniors through their last full year. And you know, so we started back in September, October of last year, and we picked a senior and followed them throughout their graduation. And little did we know that in the middle of that, we were going to have this pandemic come and hit us. And you know, this young man, Aaron Jackson, he was actually homeless for a while and living with his dad, and then went through juvenile hall and also through group homes. And he was able to find his a place to stay through some of the local county you know, resources, city resources as well. And so he's actually done really well, and he got accepted into USF. But in the middle of this, he's, you know, living by himself. He's 18 years old, and he's got to take care of himself and manage kind of like his education, you know, throughout this pandemic, and staying in school and keeping his grades up. And so this was like the last chapter that we did about their lead up to graduation. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I couldn't go into his facility anymore. I couldn't photograph him. So my only because it's a city or a private facility, so they had restrictions on visitors, and so at that point it was just, you know, I wasn't able to keep following him or going to his home. But got to follow him a couple times around the city when he went to visit his great grandmother. You know, she was really sweet, and, you know, was really happy that it was being looked after, or he's being taken care of. And, you know, she's very vigilant about him being a gentleman. She very much like him left home when she was 15. And so there was this really great parallel between who he is and who she is, and their shared experience of being on their own at that, you know, stage in life. And, you know, for a kid who was homeless and, you know, he had a little bit of trouble, he's really the nicest kid on earth. He's really, still calls me sir, which I hate, because I don't feel like I'm not at a place in life where I should be called sir yet. I think it's a, you know, something that, you know, you earn, and I don't know if I've earned that yet. But he did go out with a friend of his to some of the protests in front of Libby Schaff's house. And, you know, got to spend a little time with him getting his hair done before getting his senior portraits made. And, you know, he was just a great kid. And, you know, we're still going to follow him through the next few months as he goes off to college, or, you know, goes off to his, you know, dining room computer, you know, to do his classes online. But, you know, when he told me he needed to get his hair done before the portraits, I'm like, I've got to go with you, because it was such, you know, he'd been talking about it for months, and so it was really one of those things that I felt needed to be shared. And I think he just, you know, felt every, you know, it's like most of us have been out of personal touch with other people for so long. And I think this picture says a lot about his that, you know, that moment where you just finally like get the thing that you need done, you know. And did a quick couple portraits of him up in the redwoods. you know, and really happy that he was able to get this done and got accepted to USF, which was his you know, his school of choice. So, you know, he did really well, maintained a 4.0. And, you know, you think about a kid who's gone through life like that to maintain a 4.0, and it's pretty amazing.
Hey, Carlos, a question came up in the chat that I think is interesting from Nate. It's wonderful to see the human side and see these stories, particularly for, I think, a lot of us, just to see smiling and joy when we're not. There isn't a lot of that going around. When you are shooting for the Chronicle and making these stories, you work with a writer, and how does that change, or not at all, your approach? Are you going out with your camera? Is it a collaboration? Where do these stories come from? How do you pursue them?
Yeah, typically it is a collaboration. The different projects that we're working on are like the nurses were a collaboration with Trisha Tadani. She found the people that I would photograph. She'd been doing so many stories about healthcare workers and what they were going through that she had a list of contacts. And so she gave me the contacts, kind of narrowed it down so that I would have about 8 people to work with. Gave me a brief summary about who everyone was and what they were doing and what organizations they worked with. And at that point, it was up to me to make the phone calls and get a little more out of them. You know, again, it's as a journalist, as a photojournalist, you do a little bit of reporting before you start taking pictures. And a good amount of my time when I first get to a scene, typically, and this doesn't apply as much now, but typically you spend a little bit of time talking to people before you start photographing, because, you know, that little rapport kind of like gets them comfortable. And a lot of people aren't really, how should I say, they're not really experienced in front of a camera, so they tend to freeze up, or they feel, okay, what do you want me to do? and typically for a photojournalist, we almost want to be, we want the situation to kind of unfold like we're not there. I mean, I hate to use the cliche fly on a wall, but that's kind of what you want, is for people to forget that you're there. And I'm kind of hard to forget that I'm there because I'm like 6'4", and, you know, I'm a pretty big dude. So I walk into your house and you're not going to forget that I'm there. But ultimately, you know, if you are able to have a good rapport with people, really kind of like engage with them and make them feel comfortable, then they do kind of like let that guard down a little bit. And that's, you know, with Aaron, I've been working with him for over 7 or 8 months now. And so he's learned to just relax, and he's got this great, you know, aspect to him. He still likes to kind of like, you know, prop himself up a little bit in terms of like, oh no, I got to look tough here, or I got to look really smart here. I'm like, dude, relax. You know, it's like, you are who you are, and people are going to love that. But like in certain situations, like with the nurses, you just kind of have to like get them at ease. And again, it's one of those tricks that you learn as somebody who engages with people quite often, is like, you know, it's hard with the mask on because you can't smile as much. You can't like, you know, really, you know, just engage in chit chat or whatever. But you know, they kind of have an idea of what you're going through, and you learn to smile with your eyes a little bit more. I know it's such a weird thing to say, but you just kind of engage with people, and even just verbally use language that really helps people feel comfortable with you. And like even with the survivors, you just, you know, it's like I'm in awe of everything that they've done to get through that, and I let them know that, because I feel like telling people, you know, I'm sort of a conduit from the public to them. And so I want them to know that there are people out there and who will feel as impressed and grateful for their survival as I am at that point. So I'm like giving them that message. You know, I want my pictures to convey something, a feeling, a moment, a kind of this sentiment that when somebody looks at it, I want them to feel the same way. And so I'm trying to make pictures that contain that. And it's this ephemeral thing that you can't make happen all the time. It's not like you just flip a switch and it goes. So it's talking to people and being able to establish that comfort is really important for that. I'm still in touch with most of these people because, you know, they are, you know, potentially, you know, still going to be somebody that I can, you know, work with later on down the line. Right. And
it's wonderful to see. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you, but it's wonderful to see. I think we think of documentary photography as being sort of dispassionate. And what you're getting at is this genuine human connection. And as we're all hungering for that, it's really refreshing to see it, particularly in these images and the images of the survivors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing is, I mean, I think, you know, documentary, I think as much as there's that, again, you know, as much as I don't want to alter the situation that I'm photographing in, because you know, just by observing something, you're changing it, right? That's the Heisenberg principle. It's just, you know, but also you want to know that what you're photographing is real. So I think that there's a fine line of, you know, where we can get that by building up that acknowledgement, that transparency, I guess you could say again, of what you're doing and what you're trying to put out there. And I'm a trained enough observer for body language, for voice, or choice of words, or the tone of somebody's speech, that I can understand what they're trying to say without, you know, actually just analyzing the exact words that they say, kind of a deal. It's just something you pick up after, you know, almost 30 years for me of being a journalist. We're visual reporters first and foremost, and so sometimes you don't even need to hear the words to know what they're trying to say. And with Aaron, I think he just, you know, feels his joy, I think, is just like, it's infectious, because he knows what he's been through. And I think capturing that moment is really important, because I think he didn't think he was going to get this far. And so I wanted those moments to really, you know, come out in those photographs. Does that make sense?
It does. We are approaching our last 5 minutes here. I want to shift gears a little bit to another question that came up in the chat that you already addressed a little bit. Our own Erica Gentry asked this about your personal safety. And this came up when you were talking about whether or not you should get out of a car. Yeah. And I wanted to expand on the question, and maybe this is a good way to wrap it up. As I gave the intro at the outset, you know, I rattled off all the places you've been, all the extraordinary events and people and times that you've covered. It feels like this, for many of us, this feels different. As you're out there documenting and being present and connecting with protesters, with survivors, with frontline workers, how does this compare to other times and places and eras that you've been in with your camera?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I've seen some pretty gruesome stuff. I've been, you know, I've been sent around the world for natural disasters or war, or, you know, situations that a lot of people don't get to see every day. I covered Hurricane Mitch in 1998, I believe, and 20,000 people were killed in that area where it hit. The cholera outbreaks. I was sent to El Salvador during the earthquake, where like 2,500 people were killed. And, you know, it's really tricky, because you learn, you know, at that age, I was literally, you know, 25, 26, learning how to navigate, you know, my own emotions in a situation like that, but all my, you know, my mental health as well. And that's something that you kind of learn on the fly. In situations like that. And, you know, then covering things like, you know, Rodney King, the protest back in '91, when I first got to San Francisco State, you know, we'd never seen anything like that, because that was the first ever recorded incident. I mean, I guess the first largely, you know, distributed recording of a police misconduct. And so it was really, you know, every one of these things that you cover kind of give you a little bit of a platform to kind of, you know, step on when you're, you know, going to the next one. And, you know, you just learn to be careful. I mean, I had to pull 4 guys off of a friend of mine during the protests in 2012. They jumped him and were about to stomp him. He was another photographer. And that changed how I approach certain things. You know, I don't stay on the outskirts of protests anymore. It actually is, you're in some ways safer to be kind of in the middle, as opposed to removed from the main group, because that's where the trouble is. That's where people kind of stay away, and more of the photographers getting robbed happen, that kind of thing. So you learn as you go. You know, it's just one of those things about, you know, being aware of what you're doing. Don't get so wrapped up in the moment where you forget that, oh, I need to kind of like keep an eye on everything around me. You're you're constantly keeping an eye on things, not just for yourself, but also, you know, for your own safety, but also for the people around you, your reporters, or, you know, even like if somebody, you know, if the police are coming, you know how to step out of the way, not get arrested or whatever. There's all those little layers upon this, you know, this moment that you have to kind of keep aware of. Does that make sense?
It does. Carlos, thank you so much for sharing your images. It's just such an incredible range. Uh, and I think we're all feeling touched and moved and really inspired. Thank you so much for your stories and your images. We really appreciate it.
I'm glad to have been able to share. And, you know, if you want to pass along any questions that anybody has that we didn't, add, you know, wasn't able to answer, then I'd be glad to kind of, you know, to talk about it a little bit, and just, you know, you can share them with the participants later if you like.
We can follow up. For now, I think I am going to wrap it up because I want to make sure to thank all the people who make this possible. But first, I also want to remind everyone here, it's wonderful to see regulars who have been coming to these events. It's great to see new people who are here too. So just a reminder that the reason we can get together and see images like this and meet image makers like Carlos, it relies on your support. So we need your membership, we need your donations. You can do all of that at our website, sfcamerawork.org. None of this happens without a lot of help. I want to thank, as always, Christina Graber, who makes this possible. Erica Gentry was instrumental in connecting us with Carlos. Thank you, Erica. Jean Dominique, our board member, is here, and I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you for being here, Jean. And especially, I want to acknowledge and hand it off briefly to my friend and our board president, Michelle Branch, and she can take us out. Michelle.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Carlos, it's a real honor to see your work. You know, so many of us are inside and haven't had the opportunity to be outside or to convene with family or friends, and some people would like to go to protests and haven't been able to. So thank you for sharing with us, and thank you also for the risk that you're taking to bring a view of San Francisco and the world to us. So thank you for that. I just wanted to say to everybody out there, thank you again for joining us today. We are going to have more programming in the future coming up very soon. I know that I'm seeing some language in the chat here saying people are excited to see photojournalism. So I wanted to let you know that these days we're experimenting with different kinds of work from the camera. We believe here in the power of the camera, and we want to make sure that we're looking at diverse artists, diverse photojournalists, and all different kinds of ways to think about the media, not only traditional, but contemporary as well. So please stay tuned for more innovative work coming through Camerawork. So thank you. And thank you to everyone on the board and Christina especially.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We'll say goodbye for now, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you again for being here.